Hi, I'm Suzanne Vardy. I'm a clinical counselor in North Vancouver in British Columbia, and I am here on the traditional and unceded territory of the Coast Salish, specifically the Tsleil-Waututh and the Squamish nations. And I'm delighted to be here today sharing with you compassionate kids teaching social and emotional skills at home. So I'm just going to share my screen with you and get going. So here we are. This is a little bit about me. So I have two school-age children, 8 and 11 currently. As I said, I'm a clinical counselor. I also work for a local school district on the Safe and Caring Schools team. So with other people, my part of that role is to make sure that schools are safe and welcoming places for our children, for our families, and for our staff. And I'm also teaching in the Masters of Education for School-Based Counselors at the City University of Seattle. So to start, what I would invite you to do is with me is this exercise called What's the Weather Inside? And it's just a nice one to sort of help us arrive in this space today. And the reason I chose it is because it's one of the favorite ones that I do with my kids. It's one that they like. And so I thought it might be fun to share with you because it might be something that you can do with your children as well. And it's from this book, Sitting Still Like a Frog, Mindfulness Exercises for Kids. So to begin, I'd invite you just to sort of sit in a comfortable position, maybe with your feet on the floor. For kids, I sort of say like, pretend like you're zipping up your jacket. So your back sort of straight, but not rigid. Your hands in your lap or on your, just resting on your knees. And then you can either look down at the ground with a soft gaze or close your eyes, just some way to be able to focus inside. And once you're there, just inviting you to take a couple of breaths. And then turning your attention to inside your body and noticing if there was a weather system inside your body right now, what would it be? Would it be stormy and cloudy? Would it be sunny, bright skies? Would there be a wind, a howling wind, or just a breeze? So just noticing. And as you notice, knowing that we cannot change the weather, that if there's sunny skies right now, we can't hang on to that. We know that the rain will come. And if it's rainy right now, knowing that we can't push that out of the way. The weather just comes and it goes, and the sun will be back. So we're just noticing. And knowing that our emotions are like the weather. They come and they go. We can't hold on to them. We can't push them out of the way. We just know that they will flow through. They will always change. And then just bringing your attention back to your breath for a couple of breaths. And then when you're ready, slowly coming back to the room, just lifting your gaze or opening your eyes. And welcome back. And so when I do that with my children, we have a conversation about what was the weather. And it's just a way to help them tune in to what's sort of happening for them, helps us slow down, helps bring a pause. And this idea that our emotions, they pass through. If I'm angry right now, I'm not always going to be angry. And that can be comforting. So we're talking about social and emotional learning. So I'm going to offer you two different models for thinking about social and emotional learning. This one is from CASEL, which is a collaborative for academic and social emotional learning. The website is just below there on the right-hand side, casel.org. And they say that social emotional learning is the process through which all young people and adults acquire and apply the knowledge, skills, attitudes to develop healthy identities, manage emotions, and achieve personal and collective goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain supportive relationships, and make responsible and caring decisions. So they're the skills, the social and emotional skills that we get by doing this social and emotional learning are the skills we need to become healthy, happy, competent, contributing adults. Over on the left-hand side there, you can see that CASEL has divided these skills into 5 different categories. The first one is self-awareness, and that's sort of knowing our strengths, knowing our challenges, being aware of the sensations in our body, having an awareness of self. What do I like? What don't I like? What's my cultural background? That is all part of self-awareness. Self-management is that once I have that self-awareness, how do I then manage? Do I know how to sort of settle my body if it needs settling? Do I know how to upregulate? Do I know how to sort of bring a little more energy into me if I need that? Just being able to sort of self-regulate, that fits under self-management. Social awareness is then broadening that lens and noticing what's happening around us and how are the people doing around us. It's where we begin to talk about empathy and perspective taking, sort of just having that awareness of others. Relationship skills is being connected to others in healthy, positive ways, knowing how to establish those relationships, knowing how to maintain those relationships, having good communication skills, all fits under healthy relationship skills there. And then responsible decision making is sort of that ethical piece of knowing what is best for me or what my needs and wants are, be having that social awareness and knowing what other people and what is sort of wanted and from other people, and then being able to fit those together to make responsible, ethical decisions. It's sort of that greater good piece. And then you can see around the outside there, sort of, we do this in our classrooms, in our schools, our families, we do it at home, and then in our communities as well. So for social and emotional learning, there's this explicit skill building piece where we're sort of teaching these skills, and that's sort of some of what we'll talk about later here. There's also an implicit piece. How do we create the conditions to allow our children to blossom? So how do we build home environments, school environments, community environments where children feel safe and are able to take some risks, because we know they're going to make mistakes as they learn some of these skills. It's how we learn. We all do it. So how do we establish safe and loving environments where they can sort of take some of these risks, where they can focus and where they can stretch themselves? So that's a social and emotional learning model from CASEL. This one is from the Dalai Lama Center for Peace and Education. They call it their heart, mind, well-being framework. And it's the same idea. They've just divided it up a little bit differently. And they've done it in collaboration with the Human Early Learning Partnership, HELP, out of UBC, the University of British Columbia. So in the top right-hand corner there with alert and engaged, that's that piece of being able to manage our emotions, being able to manage our thoughts, being able to be present and be really with somebody. Secure and calm is the skill of how do we manage day to day with that overwhelm or sadness, with those emotions that we're feeling. How do we cope with stress, and how do we bounce back? That resilience, that's sort of encompassed in that secure and calm piece. Solves problems peacefully. That's how do we create these environments where we're sort of fostering friendships where we're building healthy relationships with our family and with our friends. How do we do that perspective taking? That's all part of that solves problems peacefully. Compassionate and kind is the skills of being compassionate. Sort of how do we practice self-compassion? How do we treat ourselves as a friend? And how do we treat our friends? And compassion goes a little bit beyond empathy, in that being compassionate is wanting to take action as well to sort of alleviate the suffering of others. So how do we do that? How do we offer that? And that's a skill that we can build and we can nurture, and then gets along with others. So that communication piece, how do we solve conflict? How do we regulate in order to do that? You begin to see that there's some overlap here. If I'm going to be in conflict with somebody and I want to get along with them and I want to employ my problem solving skills, I also need to be able to regulate my body, which goes back to that sort of alert and engaged, secure and calm side of the heart there. So they all fit together in a really lovely way. So this again, you can look up. It's HeartMind Online is the website. I've got at the end some resources, and it is in there the link to this. So that's another place you can go to learn more about social emotional learning. This is a model that I have adapted from Jennings and Greenberg's the pro-social classroom model. So I call it raising resilient, socially and emotionally wise children. And what this really highlights, this model, is how the outcomes for our children are so linked into how we treat ourselves as the grown-ups, as the adults. What are our social emotional skills? How do we look after ourselves? So if we start over on the right-hand side there, if we want sort of socially, emotionally aware and engaged and competent children, then we need to have that home environment that is allowing them to develop these skills. It's a healthy home environment where they can be safe, where they can take some risks, where they can try new things out, where if they do sort of try some new things out, then we're being supportive of them, where we're giving them the leeway to do that. Sort of it's that balance between finding the right place between sort of scaffolding so that our children can try some of these things and have sort of a little bit of guidance as they do it, but then also giving them the space to try that. They need the room to try these skills. So it means sort of stepping back a bit sometimes coming in with a little more guidance, so that how do we negotiate that and manage that? And having a healthy home environment depends on these three pieces in the middle here, which is a healthy parent-child, caregiver-child relationship. How do we relate to our child? How do we manage ourselves in times of conflict? How do we, the second one going down there, how do we model positive social and emotional skills? How do I talk to myself when things aren't going well for me? Am I really self-critical? Do my children hear and see me sort of talking down to myself and sort of saying to myself or acting as if, oh, you're never going to get this. I can't believe you tried that again. That really self-critical voice that so many of us have. We don't want to be modeling that for our children. We want to be modeling kindness to ourselves for our children, because that's how we want them to treat themselves when they get to be adults. So they need to see us doing that as well. And then how do we establish clear behavioral expectations? That piece where we have boundaries, where we have limits, and we're setting them and we're maintaining them in really clear ways. Then also when sort of our children bump up against those expectations, that we are sort of enforcing in a kind but firm way. Sort of how are we doing that? And all of this depends on how we treat ourselves, how we regulate ourselves. I cannot help my child regulate. I cannot help my child be kind and compassionate if I am not practicing those skills as well. I need to be coming from a place of groundedness, of presence, of being really there for my child, right? Which is easy to say, and it's not as easy to do. So We just need to be really kind to ourselves as we go through this process of learning how to model this for our children and learning how to regulate ourselves so that we can have that solid connection, that presence for our children. And then underneath, those are sort of the community, the home, the sort of contextual factors. So again, that sort of implicit piece of how are we setting the stage? What are our own supports? Who's supporting me as I do this? Because I'm going to need support because I'm going to make mistakes too. So how am I getting my strength in all of this? And this piece is so incredibly important. That piece of how we look after ourselves. And I think sometimes um, as parents, we forget, as caregivers, we forget how important that piece is and how much our children are looking to us and watching how we respond to situations and looking at how we treat ourselves and learning from that. We forget that they are sort of observing us all the time. So just really keeping that in mind. And sometimes it's easier to sort of remember that our own well-being, our own mental health is important if we kind of look at it from this perspective of what are the risks to ourselves and to the children in our care if we do not look after our own well-being. Sort of sometimes it's easier to sort of notice our impact on our children if we look at it from this perspective. So for example, for myself, if I am worried about something, or if I am sort of feeling a bit at odds with my partner and I'm stressed about that, or if I haven't had enough sleep, I am much more irritable with my children. I don't have the presence that I want to have with them. I'm less patient. So I know that I need to look after myself if I want to be present, patient, and less irritable with my children. This is also important in this conversation, just to remind ourselves that we are also in the middle of a pandemic. So doing all these things is going to be harder. It's harder to regulate ourselves right now. We have less bandwidth. We're sort of, I sometimes talk about it as like we're vibrating at a higher frequency. We just have less patience to start with because we are all, the pandemic is unpredictable and we're not creatures who are meant, we do our best when we are in situations where we feel like we have an element of control. And right now, we don't have that so much. So none of us are at our very best right now. And so sort of when we're kind of coming back here and we're thinking about what's our well-being, how's our mental health, also sort of giving ourselves some grace that we are doing our very best and we are in the middle of a pandemic, okay? So what I want to play for you is this video. It's Mark Greenberg, who was the person who did that pro-social model of the classroom that I then built that other parenting model off of. And he is talking here. He's just sort of bringing together some of the elements that we've talked um, about sort of the listening to ourselves, about that self-awareness, and about the regulation. So sort of how these social emotional pieces all overlap and come together. So I'm just going to play this for you. It's a 3-minute video. Let me get it back again. There we
go. Emotion regulation is really the key to the human development. And when we can regulate our emotions effectively, and even as adults, we're still working on this every day, the more we can regulate our emotions, the more likely we are to be able to help others. Because the more that I feel in control and I understand myself, the less time I have to worry about my own needs, and the more I can think about and act on the needs of others. So we see a direct relationship between being able to regulate your emotions well and being able to be kind and caring and altruistic and compassionate to others. And this is why it's so important that we help children to understand their emotions, to be able to learn how to express them, verbally and writing, in art, lots of different ways, and to be for children to understand that all emotions are okay to have, even those that are difficult, that include suffering or shame, because by expressing those feelings, we begin to see them in a new way. And we know from the neuroscience of emotion that being able to put words to emotions is just like a good kindergarten teacher says, use your words. We know now from the neuroscience of this that when we can put words to emotions, they change. The whole nature of the sense in the brain changes, what's activated in the brain, but also our sense of ourselves changes. Because when we can put words to something, it changes the nature of the sense of what it is that we're experiencing. You know, when children are really young, they act out their emotions. Every parent's been called from a daycare when their child's 2 or 3 that their child's bitten someone. Because when you feel angry, the first thing you want to do, it's instinctual, is to do that, is to bite or to grab or to hurt. Because anger, for example, wants us to explode, to express outward. And so this first revolution of child development occurs when children have what Vygotsky called the second signal system, and that is the ability to now link language and representation to those emotions. But we know even as adults, oftentimes we have a hard time putting our feelings into words. As parents and as teachers, oftentimes we'll act out our emotions rather than express them verbally. But we know that when children learn to develop that ability to verbally express their emotions, it's a watershed in development. And the more children can learn to do this appropriately, the better. Now, there's nothing worse than a neurotic person who never shuts up about their emotions, that wants to tell you every day how they're feeling all the time. So it's not just that we should teach children to express their emotions all the time. We should teach them the ability to express their emotions and then help them understand in what social context and with whom and when are the right times to do this.
So that video is from heartmindonline.org, which is the Dalai Lama Center website. So you can go there and re-watch it. And he's talking about so much in there. He's talking about is how parents and caregivers, our own regulation, it's so important to be able to regulate our children. He's talking about how self-awareness is related to being able to regulate our emotions, which is then related to sort of our ability to express kindness and compassion. So he begins to sort of talk about how all these things link in together, which is great to know. But now what do we do about it? So I'm going to offer you a couple of practices. I'm going to offer you 4 I put them into 4 different categories of some ways that you can begin to nurture social and emotional learning in your children. And again, at the very end, I'll give you some websites where you can begin to explore some of these more if you want, and have, sort of begin to find out what fits for you. The sort of some of these practices, they need to resonate with us. We can't do them like the what's the weather inside, for example. I like that one too. It really resonates with me. So my children like it, and so that's a good one for us to do. If it doesn't resonate with me, it's really challenging to be able to sort of do that. So some of this is just figuring out what works for you. Okay. So we're going to talk a bit about modeling a bit more. We've already talked about that, but we're going to talk about it a bit more. Emotional vocabulary, which Dr. Greenberg was talking about there, being able to put language to our emotions, mindfulness, and then savoring joy. So Dan Siegel and Mary Hartzell in their book, Parenting from the Inside Out, have this quote. So parents can learn ways of being with their children that promote the development of empathy and compassionate understanding. This way of being is rooted in a parent's compassionate self-understanding. When we begin to know ourselves in an open and self-supportive way, we take the first step in the process that encourages our children to know themselves. This intentional stance, this attitude centered in self-awareness, is a purposeful, mindful approach toward parenting. What I love about this quote is that it talks about how we treat ourselves being so important. And it talks about that that is an intentional stance, that we need to learn how to do that. And we can learn how to do that. It's not necessarily easy. You know, some of us probably have a lifetime of not being kind and compassionate to ourselves. And it feels wrong to do that. It feels like I don't deserve that. It can feel like, what's the point? And so there's a lot to unpack with that. But when we begin to take those steps to being kind and compassionate, and he talks about being open and self supportive to ourselves, then we can begin to help our children do that as well for themselves. If I'm telling my child, I want you to be happy, I want you to grow up to be a healthy adult, but what I'm modeling for them is not that. I'm modeling for them somebody who doesn't get enough sleep, always puts themselves last, has a self critical voice. If that's what I'm modeling for them, that is actually what they're learning that an adult looks like. They're learning that this is what an adult is. An adult is somebody who doesn't get enough sleep, doesn't eat very well, puts everybody else before themselves in a way that depletes them. So then they have nothing left to give. That's what they're learning an adult is. So I need, in order to teach them what a happy, healthy adult looks like, I need to be able to do that for myself so that they can learn that. And as he says, that's an intentional stance. Okay. So modeling is often overlooked, but so incredibly important. If any, it's overlooked by us in our parenting and our caregiving. But if you look at sort of the articles and the research that comes out on how to support our kids to be kind, compassionate, healthy, um, pro social grown-ups, modeling is always right at the top. So, emotional vocabulary, how do you build the language of emotion in children? As Dr. Greenberg was saying, this is so important because we change when we begin to be able to put names to our feelings. There's the saying is name it to tame it that Dan Siegel and others use. If we can name it to, then we can begin to tame that emotion. We can begin to kind of get in front of the emotion rather than having the emotion in front of us. And in sort of being able to do that, we need to know the language of emotion. So how do we do that? How do we teach them? Well, we model it for them. So we say things like, oh, I'm really beginning to feel frustrated right now. Okay. Or I'm noticing that my stomach has a lot of butterflies. My shoulders feel really tense. I wonder if I'm nervous about something, or maybe I'm getting irritated about something. Yeah, I think I'm getting irritated about something. And we talk it out loud. We model it for them. So here is where we need to be able to have these skills as well. And we can do it really explicitly, but we can also just do it in the way of, okay, I just need a moment. I'm just beginning to feel overwhelmed. So we just sort of do it in a bit more of a quieter way. And then this name it to tame it, where we begin to label emotions for them. So we can do it for ourselves in that kind of modeling kind of way, but we can also do it for them where we can say, oh, I notice that your sort of eyebrows are sort of a little bit furrowed, that you're sort of are sort of your body language is a bit hunched over. Your tone's a little bit harsh. I'm wondering if you're feeling upset or if you're feeling angry. We don't have to be right in the sort of language we're using, but we need to begin to offer them some language. So noticing when they feel frustrated, noticing when they feel angry or irritated or mad, but also offering the language of joyful emotion too. So, oh, I notice that you're jumping up and down, you have lots of energy in your body. You look really happy to me right now. Your eyes are really wide. Are you surprised, or is there something else happening for you? So also giving them the language of those more pleasant emotions as well. You can do it when you're reading books. So you can talk about the characters in the story. What do you think this character is feeling? And what clues do you have? Like we were just talking about, sort of what do you notice in the facial expression, the vocal tone, like have them begin to sort of really intentionally pay attention to what is telling them how this character is feeling. What are some other words? Have you ever felt this way? Do you think this character likes feeling like this? What do you think this person could do to feel more or less like this? So you're beginning to talk about perspective taking, like how do you think this character feels to feel like this? And then you're beginning to talk about regulation. What could you do to feel more of this? What could you do to feel less of this? With younger children, sometimes it might look like drawing their feeling. You might sort of personify stuffies or puppets. You know, they might have some feelings. It's sort of a way to begin to introduce that language. With older children, it gets a little harder, but you can do it with movies, or you can even like do a book club. If your child is sort of at an age when they don't really want to be reading with you, you can be sort of, maybe you read the book, they read the book, and then you have a conversation about the book together. And you can use some of these same questions. It doesn't have to be every page. I have done that, and my daughter is, Mom, just read the book. So again, it's that idea of playing with it, like try it out, see how it works. And so I kind of now know the rhythm of, I don't ask on every page, just once in a while I kind of put in one or two of these questions. So they get it. They begin to, they learn. So mindfulness was that third way that we were talking about sort of nurturing these social and emotional skills. We've talked about modeling. We've talked about building an emotional vocabulary, that emotional literacy. Mindfulness is the third way. And John Kabat-Zinn's definition for mindfulness is it's to pay attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and without judgment. So without judgment is just that idea of noticing. It's neither good nor bad. It just is. That gives us some information. It's data. We're just learning sort of what are we feeling and what's that telling us about what's happening for us right now. You can see it's also got that intentionality to it, right? In a particular way, on purpose. Here we are with intention again. So there's a lot of research behind mindfulness. It's exploded in sort of the last 20, 25 years. And we know that people who practice mindfulness have a better immune system. They show increased ability to focus. They're able to, sort of mindfulness gives us that moment to respond rather than react. So rather than having a big emotion sort of where we are reacting, we're able to sort of take a bit of a pause, and then we're able to respond. Not all the time and not right away. It sort of comes with practice over time. It builds self-awareness. Sort of having that pause allows us just to slow down for a moment to check in with how we're feeling, which also then, as Dr. Greenberg was saying, that self-awareness, then we can begin to sort of self-regulate. What's the weather inside is a beautiful example, right? We were just noticing the weather, and then we're applying that same analogy to emotions. It just comes and it goes. There's no judgment here. And we're paying attention in a particular way, on purpose and in the present moment. Okay. So stop is another little mini practice that you can do to help with that sort of mindfulness and that idea of just being present for yourself for a moment. So you can do this for yourself. It's also something you can teach to your children. It's something you can model for your children if you do it out loud. So STOP is an acronym. The S stands for stop. So it's just bringing your body to rest for a moment. The T is take a breath. The O is observe. So just noticing any thoughts, feelings, sensations. So my heart's beating a little bit fast. My thoughts are sort of, what time are we at? How much more time do I have left? Am I making any sense? Right? I'm just noticing those. And then I'm going to proceed. So I'm just going to move on. And that's a way of just doing that pause, just taking a moment to tune in to self-awareness. So again, it's a practice you can teach your children. It's a practice you can do when you're just needing that pause before you respond to your children. Okay? There's lots of other things as well. These mindful games. There's a book. There's also these activity cards. This is Suzer Kaiser Greenland, who does a lot of mindfulness. She has a website as well, but a lot of mindfulness games and books for kids. Square breathing. There's lots of different ways to practice breathing. This is just one. So square breathing is when you trace a square with your finger and you breathe in for 4 seconds. You hold it, breathe out, and you hold it. Okay. So square breathing is something that I do with my kids before bed. If they're sort of worried and they're sort of thinking about, I need to do this tomorrow, I need to have this done, I need to like, I've got to practice, I need to do this, then we just do some square breathing together. Square breathing might not resonate for everybody. There's 5-finger breathing, which is breathing out as you go up. No, breathing in as you go up and out as you go down. So you go through all your fingers. There's lots of different ways that you can practice breathing, and it is a way that again just gives you that pause, brings you back to the present moment. Okay, so sometimes when we're doing these things, this is my daughter Ellie. When we're doing these things, when we're trying to teach these things to our children, I sometimes have this question of, is this landing? Is any of this kind of resonating with them, making sense to them? Is it helpful for them? So this is when she was 6. She was telling me a story about a bike camp she had been at. And I was like, oh, can you just hang on? Can I get my camera? Can I videotape you? So this is because, and what I was so, what was so satisfying, or what was making me so joyful to see this, was it was sort of her talking about how these things that we had been doing were all beginning to come together for her. So let me play this video for you.
First, you sing a little song to yourself for a while. Then you listen to what's around you. Then you sing the same song again, but you sing it for a shorter time. Then you listen and hear what's around you, and you say what you see around you. Then you're done.
And what does that do?
It calms you down.
It calms you down, and how did you discover that it calms you down?
Because when I was biking, I did it, and it calmed me down a lot.
Yeah. And what's the song that you were singing to yourself?
I forget. It was last week.
It was last week?
When I was in bike camp, I did it.
Ah. And why were you doing it when you were in bike camp?
Because it's just super energetic, kinda.
Ah.
I was super energetic, and I wanted to calm down.
Huh. And then how did you get the idea to like look around you and see what was around you, or listen around you?
It started all, because I was just kept on singing a little song on the when I was on the bike, and then I got the idea to hear. Then I got the idea that it could be something mindful when I was singing it.
Ah, and so the mindful was listening to things around you and looking at things around you.
Yeah.
And it worked for you.
Yeah, or you could also do what's the weather inside you and other calm things added to it. But that's the part that I did. But I didn't do the weather part.
Yeah. Yeah, we like the weather part too, hey? You like that and I like that as well.
Yeah.
But that you can save that for a different time. Mm-hmm. Awesome. That's so cool to hear, kiddo.
So what I love about this video is that you can see the linking of those skills, the self-awareness that she had too much energy in her body and she sort of wanted to settle. So she begins to sing a song. She sort of knows that she wants to self-regulate. She begins to sort of pay attention to what's around her. And then that sort of leads her to being able to sort of settle her body. So all the skills that needed to be able to go into that. And until that moment, I was like, I don't know, is what I'm doing at home helping at all? So that was what I thought was so beautiful about that moment. Savoring joy is our fourth thing, and this is from Rick Hansen. He has a book called Hardwiring Happiness, and he, excuse me, has it's another acronym, HEAL, and the H is have a positive experience, the E is enrich it, A is absorb it, and L is link positive and negative material. Now you don't have to do the L. You can if you want. If you are interested in it, you can you can Google. And there's lots of videos of him talking about it. There's lots of articles written about it. But the H, the E, and the A, the first part, I find really helpful. So what you are doing is you are just with that intention focusing on a positive experience, and it does not have to be a big experience. You can see on the right hand side there, I've got a picture of my tea tray. I love drinking tea. So here's my positive experience, and when I'm doing it, I'm going to enrich it, and so I'm going to pay attention to it using all my senses. Which means just sort of really narrowing my focus. What's the taste of that tea? Where am I sitting? What can I hear around me? I can make everything bigger. Sometimes the way I enrich it is I kind of imagine it in Technicolor, right? So there's different ways of enriching it, sort of either sort of adding in other senses, like what am I smelling as I drink my tea? So I already have that sense working. I'm not really adding it in, but I'm paying more attention to it to enrich that moment. And Rick Hansen says you need to do that for about 10 seconds. So it's not long. It's not long. And then absorb it. So then notice it coming in. And I sometimes think of the A as anchoring it. Some people imagine it sort of going into their brain and those sort of neural connections in their brain sort of to enhance a positive experience. I kind of imagine it going into my bones. I imagine it really going into my body, into my bones. Some people sort of absorb it into their heart. So there's different ways to do it. Just sort of see what works for you. You can do this with children when you're taking a walk. Maybe you're not sort of following exactly like this, but you're talking about, look at all these colors of green in the trees. How many colors of green can you see? Do you notice the way the light filters through the trees? So you're having a positive experience that you're enriching it by drawing their attention to specific parts of it. And then you're just absorbing it. You're noticing it together and you're drawing it in. So savoring joy is another way to increase sort of that ability to sort of pay attention to ourselves, to um, to become self-aware, to sort of nurture well-being and happiness in ourselves, which leads us to be in a more grounded place where we can sort of have this place to practice these social emotional skills from. So it's a good one to do as well. So just to recap, we have talked about all these different things in the last sort of 40 minutes, sort of what's the weather inside. We've talked about modeling. We've talked about growing sort of our emotional vocabulary, that name it to tame it. We've talked about the practice of stop. We've done square breathing and even a couple of other kinds of breathing. And then we've also talked about savoring happiness or savoring joy. And lastly, here are some resources. This first one is my own website where there's some books, there's a few articles posted there. So there's some more resources there on what we've been talking about today. Edutopia.org has a social emotional learning for parents resource there. randomacctkindness.org, Castle, and Heart Mind Online. So there are some more resources that you can go to. So I just stop that share, and I'm going to say thank you so much. If you have any questions, actually, just let me do this share one more time because I will show you. Here you go. I forgot about this last slide here. Here you go. This is how you can reach me. So through email, through my website, just feel free, all the different social media ways to reach out if you have any questions at all. And thanks so much for spending this time with me. Bye-bye.